Good evening, and welcome to Tsukiji Hongwanji Buddhist Temple. Please join me in Gassho. Thank you for coming to the Saturday English service. First, we would like to begin the service by reciting the aspiration, which can be found on page 2 in the blue service book.
Aspiration. Reverently, we come before the shrine of our Amida Buddha, the Holy One, the Perfect One. With gratitude, we have brought our offering of love and devotion to honor the Buddha. We earnestly resolve to strive to understand that holy teaching and to walk every day in the blessed path, so that, like the Buddha, may we attain the peace of nirvana. Namanavs, 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 namanavs.
We will chant the sutra, SEKIYA. Please turn to page 3 of the blue service book.
Namandav, 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 namandav. Gagon chose gam hishimu jodo shigan fumanzo seifu josho gak Gao muryoko fui dai seishu fusai shobin e seifu josho ga gashi jobutno 妙所長実法苦教未所門政府上昇学利欲人少年上映主本領しぐむ浄土一生天人し人力現代公不祥無才道少女三苦名交際集約な回避知恵伝名詞根門案閉塞小悪道 津断然衆も高僧上満足いよろじぽ日が主十地天候恩不言一種解放像公正苦毒法上王大集中説法ししく供養一切部具足習得本元年心上魔得意三害を女部無下地津田未不詳願学営利都市最小尊志願略国家大戦後感動国書店に東鎮明家ナマンダブアマンダブナマンダブナマンダブナマンダブナマンダブ願にしく毒平等性才道菩大心往生安楽法ナマンダーブナマンダーブナマンダーブナマンダーブナマンダーブナマンダーブナマンダーブナマンダー。
We will now sing the Gatha Shinshu anthem, found on page 5 in the Blue Service Book. Congregation, please rise. Please remain standing for the recitation of the three treasures found on page 4 in the same book.
The three treasures. Difficult is it to receive a human form. Now we are living it. Difficult is it to hear the Dharma of the Buddha. Now we hear it. If we do not cross over to the truth in the present life, in what life shall we cross over? Let us, with sincerity and true reverence, take refuge in the three treasures of the truth. I take refuge in the Buddha. May we, together with all sentient beings, awaken to the great way of enlightenment and to the unsurpassed intent of Amida Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. May we, together with all sentient beings, enter the storehouse of the Dharma, becoming like the wisdom ocean. I take refuge in the Sangha. May we, together with all sentient beings, become units in true accord, in harmony with all things. The peerless, profound, and wondrous Dharma is rare to encounter, even in many hundreds and thousands of kalpas. Now we are privileged to hear and receive it. Let us thoroughly understand the true meaning of Tathagata's teaching. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namanda Butsu. Namanda Butsu. Namanda Butsu. Namanda.
Please be seated. Please wait a moment until we get ready for the Dharma talk. This evening, we are so happy to have Reverend Jin SEKIYA, Minister of Zennoji Temple in Wakayama, as our guest speaker. SEKIYA Sensei will talk on meaning of the sutras reflected in daily culture. I'm glad to introduce SEKIYA Sensei to you.
Maybe this is better. I haven't been here since the pandemic, and so many things have changed, but it's very heartwarming to see a number of faces that I've seen before and meet people that I've met as well. If you would like to move forward, please do so. Then I won't have to speak so loudly and I can turn this down a bit. As I was introduced, I've become the resident minister at Zennoji Temple. It's actually my wife's family's temple, but I've taken over from my father-in-law, and I've been there. We got married in 2001, and then I took over about 8 years ago. I still work at the International Center in Kyoto. And so my work here is in Japan at Honzan is translating what's found in this. And so I've decided to use that as part of my talk today. Growing up in the United States, I'm third generation Japanese American, and so come from a family of Jodo Shinchu, of course. And so I grew up with that being the very basis for everyday life. From a very young time, was always told various things from people around me, especially my grandmother and then her friends who lived back then. There were still many Issei, the people who immigrated from Japan. And so their daily conversation consisted of a lot of phrases and words from the sutras, or they would mention things, and sometimes in English, a lot of times in Japanese. And I was always asking questions, both, maybe it was good, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But my grandmother was very patient all the time to try to explain everything. Whereas others would just, oh, it just means this. It's just, you just accept it that way. Well, I was not the one to just accept it that way. I wanted to know why. I was always asking, why this, why this, why this? There's logic behind it, or there's something, where is this found? And so I came to understand that one thing my grandmother often said was, just listen well. And then also, this is how I learned it. This is what I was told. And I was like, okay, I accept that. And so whenever her friends would come over, the other thing she would always say is, always listen to him. He has something good to say. Or listen to her. She has something good to tell you. And so it's this constant reminder of listen well. Well, in going to Kyoto, my job, I found out, I attended Japanese language school. And so I had a sort of what we call a love-hate relationship with Japanese, because it can be very difficult. For those of you who are not native Japanese speakers, yeah, we're all nodding, Very likewise, those of you who had to learn English here in Japan, very difficult. Learning any language is very difficult. But as long as you keep with it and keep at it, slowly it begins to penetrate your very hard mind. And you begin to realize, oh yeah, that's what that meant. So one of the first things in the sutras, as most of you know, if you've attended temple frequently, especially the Amida Sutra, Nyoze Gamon. And that right there, the light bulb went on. This is what I heard. This is how I heard it. So that's why she always said that. This is why she told me to always listen to it. And then going further into it, there's like, what? And then, of course, it's all in Sino-Japanese. And so it's that difficult language, that classical style. It's not regular modern Japanese. And later she would say parts of it into Japanese, and still it's like, I don't understand. It's too difficult. Well, yes, it is difficult, because this is from 2,600 years ago. But keep listening to it. Keep listening to it. And so slowly she would begin, and then learning some simple kanji. Ichiji butsuzai shae koku, gishakusen. And then, oh no, what are all of these very difficult kanji that are in here? And she, oh no, these are all the eminent priests, the arhats, that were the followers of the Buddha that were there. It's a long, long list. And it's like, okay. So she said, these are all, it's not translated, it's by sound. Okay. So it's not the literal translation of the character. No. This part is by sound. It's like, oh, kanji. Oh, no, not again. But then, in so doing, I looked at my own name, Jin. I use what they call in Japanese ateji, because I use ninben ni hitoshi, which it's not Jin, it's Jin. So it's like, then Bachan said, your name too. It's both phonetically and it also has that similar meaning to it. Close enough. It's not exactly what Jin means, but it's close enough. If you look at your own name, Eugene, in English, it means you is good birth. So it means the same as hitoshi. Can be kind. If you're of good birth, you are kind. Okay, so then it continues on. Later, she brought out in going to Kyoto, I found, if you've read the collected works of Shinran, there's a quote there that's, I have to bring him up. Reverend Tokunaga keeps as his, you might say, his mantra, always says, we do a faithful translation, but always keeping in mind what is the intent and to whom the audience are we trying to translate for. And it comes from the Mahaprajna Paramita Sutra, the Nirvana Sutra, in other words. And it says, from this day on, rely on the Dharma, not on people who teach it. Rely on the meaning, not on the words. Rely on wisdom, not on the working of the mind. Rely on the sutras that fully express the meaning, not on those that do not. Wow, that's hard. We don't rely on words, but yet we have to use words to transmit this teaching. Well, with that is the kind of thing keeping up in mind, so we go forth with it. Again, back to the Amida Sutra. The first line is Ichiji Butsuzai. So of course, everyone knows at one time or once upon a time. If you've ever read any kind of English style tale, once upon a time the Buddha was at his castle, at this castle or this location. So in looking at it, we just accept that. Well, in my line of work, we often have to reference previous translations as we go on, because we all take into account it was done at a particular time, just like it was translated from Sanskrit into Chinese. And so there's different versions of the Amida Sutra and of the larger sutra as well. So we look at it and try to compare. You can tell, oh, this was done, say, 50 years ago, or this was done 80 years ago, because language changes. Later on in the sutra, it tells about Chuya Rokuji, right? So Chuya, let's see, I have the copy here. Oh, no, I don't. And we always have to remember, this was written several thousand years ago. It's not the current interpretation of these characters. Well, one translation that I came across was, during the day and night at 6 o'clock. I thought, what? That can't be right. And so even Tokunaga sensei says, shakes his head this way, no, We reference this as incorrect. The translator did not research it. It's 6 times, just like ichiji butsuzai, 6 times during the day and night. And what is the 6 times? Priests or those who followed ascetic practices, 6 times during the day and night would do the same rotation of chanting, reading, discussing the Dharma, and then also doing other everyday activities. And it was this repetition that was done over and over and over again. Why? Because that's the way people learn. And so I remember, oh yeah, that's why Bachan always said, don't cram it all in on Friday night for Saturday mornings, Nihongo Gakko. Do it every day for at least 15 to 20 minutes. And yeah, it's the same as you learned it. You sit there and you write each Chinese character over and over and over again. Why? Because then you're using different methods of learning. You're seeing it, the activity, and then you're saying it or reading it. And so it was just like this. The repetition is what's necessary. And so everything was this repetition. Constantly hearing. It wasn't just, you can sit in your own room and do it, but she would say, read it out loud. Read the characters out loud. Hiru, chu, shoku, yoru, ya. And so it slowly began to sink in. Oh, there is some wisdom to this idea of repetition. And then once again, there was another line in here, and it was a question that I had for the committee. And it's always interesting to me because this job that I have of translating is actually, I'm getting this education for free from all these scholars and then from all these others who ask questions of me that I have to think about, and then when I don't know, ask the Buddhist scholars. But the idea that comes out in the sutras, many sutras, is during a time for a meal. Why would something like that come out in the sutras? Does anyone have any idea? You have to take it into the context of 2,600 years ago. What do we have now that they didn't have? Well, there's lots of things we have now that they didn't have back then. But how did they keep time? There are many different ways. But if you think about it, how long does it take for you to eat a meal? Whether you're fast or slow, it's between 15 to 20 minutes, right? So that's the idea. In other words, in the Amida Sutra, once again, they go to visit each of the Buddhas throughout the 10 quarters, but they're back in time for their meal. So in other words, very swiftly they carry this out within 15 to 20 minutes. So you don't dawdle around, you don't guzu, take your time and do this and that. You do it very quickly and efficiently. I see. So in other words, the same thing with the study. When you're writing this, write it correctly, write it efficiently. Don't say, oh, I'm going to look at my phone. Set it down. It starts buzzing. Start writing. It starts buzzing again. Start looking at it. You're not doing it efficiently or very quickly. So this is another thing that came to mind as I was learning these very difficult kanji. Moving on. Then we went on to the larger sutra. This too was even more difficult. Okay, but we just chanted Jusei-ge. That part was easy. Sanbutsu-ge, that part was easy too. What was difficult were the 48 vows. So the 48 vows, here was where, once again, Tokunaga Sensei told us, for consistency, Setsuga, Tokubutsu, all of them start out with this. So what is the structure of the grammar that has to be in this? So the product came out to be, if, comma, when I attain Buddhahood, comma, nado, nado. So all of them were written this way. We referenced many, many older translations, some of the kaikyoshi from overseas who had in part translated the ones that they needed, but none of them had followed a consistent route through all 48. So we decided to do it this way. And grammatically, it's a little bit forced, but it's carried out correctly. And then his other admonishment, you might say, for us to be careful with it. And he told me, what is the overall meaning, the larger meaning of the 48 vows? What is Shakyamuni trying to tell us about this for Dharmakara Bodhisattva, who became Amida Buddha? And this one stumped me for a long time. He said, it's actually quite easy to understand if you look at it more carefully. For instance, the third vow states, if when I attain Buddhahood, the human endeavors in my land should not all be of the color of genuine gold, may I not attain perfect enlightenment. So everyone has to be the same color of genuine gold. The fourth vow is, if when I attain Buddhahood, the humans and devas in my land should not all be of the same appearance and should be either beautiful or ugly, may I not attain the perfect enlightenment. So everyone has to have that same level of appearance. It doesn't say everyone has the same face, but the appearance is of the same level. The fifth one, if when I attain Buddhahood, the humans and devas in my land should not remember all of their former lives, thus be unable to know at least the events of the previous 100,000 kotis of nayutas of kalpas, may I not attain the perfect enlightenment. So doing these 4, 5, 6 vows, Tokunaga Sensei once again asked me, so what do you think is the underlying theme? Does anyone know? Janelle? It's equality. It's equality. Not our human equality. This is an example of that. But what is equality? It changes with time. But think about it. This is from 2,600 years ago. Everyone, be they male or female, is on the same level. Everyone, no one is more beautiful or more ugly than the other. Everyone has the divine eye, in other words, same wisdom and compassion. So this is talking about the Pure Land, but it's our own, for our own world as well. So my question is, in our own world, we always talk about equality, but it's according to my own standard of equality, right? So I'm not here, I'm going to pose a question, just a rhetorical question, but when everyone here say that there's going to be refreshments later, who goes first? Who should go first? Being in my own Japanese American community, it was always everyone enryo, everyone steps back. And then who do they force to go first? Sensei, you go first, or no one's going to go. Or they will say, who's the oldest here? You go first. Or in the Western world, ladies first. But is that really equality? I don't know. It's hard to say because we live in society. And so there's a mixture of tradition, there's a mixture of culture, there's a mixture of just everyday commonality. So I bring this up to those who are studying for ministry. And so I said, but one thing that I've noticed, and all of you have done it, I know, because I've done it too. It's not just a childhood game, but it's within the society here. Jankenpo. To me, this is the most equal way of deciding because it's all left up to just how this turns out. And so when I was teaching here, when I first came, teaching English, and then even seeing my cousins, and we did this in Japanese school too, to decide who would get to this and that and the other. But you see adults do it as well, right? If we're all deciding there's only 2 pieces of cake left, but there's 3 of us. Well, sometimes we just divide it up, but then it's like we just jankenpo, and everyone accepts it. Okay, well, I lost, that's fine, you can have it. So the idea of equality is always going to be a topic. It was from 2,600 years ago. And so getting back to the sutra, well, it talks about Choro Sharihotsu, the elder Shariputra. And so I know within a lot of temple gatherings, sometimes, like I said, going for refreshments first, well, who's the Choro-san? Who's the eldest here? And so they deem this person the one to go and choose first. But in so doing, as we all grow older, I too have turned 60 as of last year. And so inside, yes, just like everyone else, I'm still 26 inside, but this body is telling me I'm 60. But anyway, with this progression in aging, there's also that responsibility to, getting back to the sutra, all those names that were listed there. As I've been going through many different sutras, this appears over and over and over again. So the question I posed to him, why? Does anyone know? In a way, it's endorsement. In a way, it's also authentication. It's also acknowledgement of individuals, everyone that was there, because at the end, and many, many, numerous others were present when Shakyamuni began to speak. So in everyday culture, how is this shown? Roll call. They read down the list of everyone who's there. And it's not just to check to see who's missing, but I also noticed here, it's like, when I was in Japanese school, it's like, oh, Dare-dare-san is not here today. Oh, I hope they're okay. There was always that concern that, and when I began teaching English here, it was the same way. Well, can you take the homework to them? Because you want to be fair. You want them to have an equal chance to study as well. So it's acknowledgement of everyone present, of everyone there. So in that sense too, that's that idea, subtle, very subtle, of equality. It's giving everyone a chance. Unfortunately, just a personal aside, my wife may scold me later, but my son doesn't always go to school for whatever reason. He just doesn't like school. I loved school, but he doesn't want to go all the time, so we don't always force him. But I also see that the teacher and then his friends at school will bring him his assignments and notes from school. So I try to point out to him, they want to include you. They acknowledge that you are not there, and they always send notes home to you. So you ought to follow up and at least respond to them. There's that tsushimbo that goes back and forth. And so it's kind of renrakubo, ne, as far as being able to correspond anyway with others. Kind of old school, you might say. It's sort of like the old style of texting each other, just to make sure everything's going well. Just before this started, Sensei came to speak to me in the back. This type of gathering, like I said, I haven't been here since before pandemic. Also, I didn't get to go home until last year. Even though we have all these devices now, being able to contact people, there's some that we've lost touch with for whatever reason. And when you discover why later on, it's very kind of, it's that lost feeling. Unfortunately, some that I was very close to did succumb to COVID and passed away. It's just they didn't let people know. Others that were from university that were not within the temple organization tried to find out, and later it's just, well, there's no way of contacting them, so very likely something happened. But in that sense, it's that feeling too of how others in the past, when things were not so instantaneous with SNS, with email, with whatever, you got the old snail mail that had to go by boat, and it would have been 3 months after the quote-unquote event happened to hear that someone passed away or were sick. And so in that kind of feeling, you see how this passing down of stories of what I have been told, what I have heard, becomes very important. When my family in the US too, we suffered a loss, and so the cousins all gathered for the first time in about 40 years. Everyone, all the 9 cousins were there. And so we decided to visit our grandparents' farm. This is kind of an aside from this, but we went to the farm in Parlier, very kind of, I think maybe only 1 or 2 of you know where that is. Do you know where Parlier is? It's in Central California anyway, but just a small farm. We went there. We no longer have, it's not in our family, but the owners allowed us to go onto the property. And so I decided, well, I'll give my older cousins, all of them are much older than I am. I'm the youngest one. And so the house is still there. I said, this is where the old pump house was. This is where the old furo, the bathhouse. The Issei still wanted that Japanese style bath out in the back where they built a fire underneath it. It's gone now, but it's just, there's a remnant of it, a foundation. And so my cousins all said, how do you know all of this? The barn was over there, and the pomegranate tree was here. The 2 persimmon trees here. I said, oh, maybe, told my older cousins, maybe you know this story. How did we get these Japanese Fuyu persimmons here? I said, well, that's right. You didn't live nearby Bachan and Ji-chan's house. We lived nearby in Fresno, so we were here every weekend. But, oh, Ji-chan brought the seeds from Japan. And fortunately, 2 trees grew. So that's why we have these, there's still the huge persimmon trees there. I didn't know that. It never occurred to me, that's what they said. And then, bathhouse? What do you mean bathhouse? And then one cousin also taught English here in Japan. And so she said, oh, I've seen something similar in one of the rural areas where I taught. But I said, no, and I took them over. You can actually see where the water or the faucet was, but then underneath on the concrete was this burned out area. I said, I never saw it because it was already gone by that time. But Auntie and my mom would say, oh yeah, we had to build a fire underneath. We had to go out into the vineyard, pick up all the dead vines and everything and brought it back here, and it was our job to build a fire every night. And so, how did you know this? Oh, Bachan would tell us about it. She would tell me, and I guess it was her way too, this was on my mother's side, of saying she wanted one of us to know so that eventually some of the others, hopefully the other cousins, would want to know. And then they began asking, well, where are we from in Japan? I said, oh, next time, if you're going to visit Japan, I'll take you there, because Bachan wanted to let me know where she was from. And so it was, very, how do you say, hishini, she wanted to make sure one of us knew where she came from, and that she was one of, back then, 9 brothers and sisters. And it was almost like learning the sutras. She would tell me the names and want me to repeat the names, so at least the names stayed in my head. And so, Komatsu, Komura, Takahashi, Shintomi, and so it went down the line. And so I said, okay. And when I finally went to visit them, Bachan had passed away, went to her own home in Japan. Of course, all of her sisters were already passed by then, but their children were there, and they would tell me, oh, I'm Komura, I'm Komatsu, I'm Shintomi, I'm so-and-so. It's like, oh, I know you, but I don't know you. I know your names. I know of you. And so, how do you know us? I said, because Bachan wanted me to listen to her. She said, listen and you will remember. Someday this will help you out. And so I think not specifically that information, but it was her insistence on listen to others. And again, from the sutra, where does this come from? There's, in the larger sutra and other sutras, it comes out. I have this. I want to show it to you because it's very important. This. Taicho. Usually this, in everyday language, akirameru. But Tokunaga Sensei Shoke said, it's not akirameru. Look it up. Look it up. It means akiraka ni naru. In other words, thoroughly. Understand it thoroughly. So thoroughly listen. And he says, because it's repeated twice in the Chinese, it has even more importance than just once to say, listen carefully. So he says, this is where it's not just give up, but when you thoroughly understand something, and then you come to realize it cannot be done this way. The other phrase that comes up is, shikata ga nai, shouga nai. Why? Because no matter what, you can't do it. This way is impossible. So you find a different way to do something. Then it began to make sense. Oh, that's why everything, shouga nai. This way, shouga nai. But you can think of a different way. So listen was always what they told me. That okay. One other part, this is kind of hard to see, but this was another huge question for me. Comes out in the smaller sutra, nyaku ichi nichi, nyaku ni nichi, nyaku san nichi, nyaku shi nichi. for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, even up to 7 days. Why? Why so specifically do they mention this? And then in other sutras, mutsu nanoka, or minanoka, 3 7 days. In other words, 3 weeks, or 6 7 days, 6 weeks. What is this reference for? Then, of course, my questions always go to Tokunaga. Why do they mention this so much? He goes, well, I don't know if I should tell you. And I said, it has to do with chewing the morning period. And so, okay, but is there an explanation of it's kind of, it's very difficult. It's very complicated because it involves a belief that started with primitive Buddhism and Hinduism, and then it was mixed in with Chinese thought. So the Chuyin-kyo, it's not really a sutra, but it's an old academic writing. And so he goes, look it up. I think you would understand it. But remember, there's lots of unnecessary things in there. Has anyone read anything similar? This Chuyin-kyo? Sensei, have you read it? It's interesting. And I think if you do read it, then this comes to be understandable more for me, and especially about why Shinran Shonin said to, this is all unnecessary. But if you think about it, my interpretation is, with each day, with each week, we change. And that's a given, yes, of course. Because of the experiences that we encounter within that 1 week, our thinking changes slightly. And especially after you encounter a death. Because, again, with other learning that I had at university, was that the, how did it go? I want to say it correctly. The different stages of emotions that you go through when someone passes away. The anger, the feeling of loss, sadness, then it's acceptance. And then you move forward again. Then you slip back again, of course, because it's not just one step. It occurs over and over and over again. And so this same understanding existed thousands of years ago. It didn't just come up in the 80s with Dr. Kubler-Ross. She wrote it down, but this was understood by Buddhists, by Taoists, by Confucianists. And so this understanding that you go through this cycle of loss. And so this Chuyin-kyo, I found it very interesting because they tell you, well, again, some of it is superstition, but the energy, the consciousness is floating, and it depends on which realm this consciousness will reappear. But the different lights appear. And so Amida is calling to you at that point. And so the warning that's given within this Chuyin-kyo is you want to escape the 6 realms. For me, right there, it all began to tie together. You want this liberation. And then all of them, not necessarily in this Chuyin-kyo, but then from other sutras will tell you, just like with the smaller sutra, all the other Buddhas are praising Amida. So in my own word, go towards Amida, go towards the Western quarter, because this Buddha Tathagata is immeasurable life, immeasurable light. 無量寿, 無量光. And so all the others, they will welcome you into their Buddha land, but their life is limited. In other words, you got to go through this cycle again. And believe me, you don't want to do that. I'm coming to realize that too. But it's the human realm, samsara. Yeah, it's interesting, it's fun, but when you think about it, we, as humans, we look back, especially when we have reunions, your dosokai, and we think, その時よかった、楽しかった. Really? We're thinking, we remember the happy times, we remember the good times. Remember when you had to study? Remember when you had to write all those essays? When you wanted to go to the movies, Janelle? I pick on her because we know each other from California. But when you wanted to do something else and you had to do all of your assignments, oh no, it wasn't fun. But yeah, I guess it was fun because sometimes those difficulties are what make us who we are. And I have until what time? もうちょっと, okay. I've come to realize too, the point of Buddhism for us, and I think because I'm in this, there are times, I have to back this up. There are times when we're doing our translations, I have to remember, not everything is Jodo Shinshu. There's other teachings there, and when we're translating the different masters, they're coming from a different background. That's why our translations always have this interpretation of this sutra according to Shinran's understanding. And then we have the original understanding, because it is slightly different. And even we say, I'm too much immersed into Jodo Shinshu sometimes to see how others interpret this. But that's why even with this Chuinkyo, you step away from Jodo Shinshu and you read that. Wow, it's interesting. Wow, it's confusing. And yes, there's lots of unnecessary stuff there that I skip over. I need to investigate more, but the overall understanding is that's why over and over and over, each week, we change. We do change. We have to change. So here's a question that I pose to my own members too. If you have a death in the family, when is the end of the mourning period? その満中院はいつでしょうか? いつでしょう? How many people think the 49th day, 四十九日が満中院? じゃあ、百日日。一周期。三回期。Pardon? Manchuing is the end of the chewing period, the mourning period. And so in today's world, because everything is faster now, a lot of people think, well, it's the 49th day, or maybe it's the 100th day. But actually, according to that Chuinkyo, it says in there that you need to visit 10 different Buddhas world, or that consciousness has to visit the 10 different worlds before it's decided if this consciousness returns to the 6 realms or is liberated. And so if you think about it, the 7 weeks, hyakka-nichi is 8. Ishuki, sankaiki. So traditionally, according to this Chuinkyo, it's not until the third year memorial, or 2 full years. So, in looking back, began to think, when my mom's mother passed away, I was still very young. I think I was like 4. That's why we didn't do anything for a couple years. Nothing. We didn't go on trips. We stayed home. We had no celebration for the holidays. Then when Dad's mother passed away, like, Mom said, go ahead and do what you have to do, because it was already the 80s. But as far as my parents, they didn't go anywhere. They stayed home. So even they followed this to some degree. But realizing too that times change a lot more quickly. When I lost my parents was when I began to think about stuff like that more. Recently, I should just go ahead and tell you, I lost my sisters last year. And so I have several, where we grew up, it was in the old Japantown, which was next to Chinatown, close Chinese friends, family friends that we had. And when I was going for my sister's funeral, kind of delayed, by chance, I don't know how else to say it, but my friend's husband passed away as I was getting on the plane to go to Fresno. And she texted me and said, his name too, that he accepted in moving from China, was also Jean. Just kind of coincidental. I never knew that. But since you're going to be here, and she said, we're Chinese American. We just need a funeral. It doesn't have to be Buddhist, Taoist, or Confucius. Just one of them is what we need you to do. And since you're our friend and you're a minister, will you do our funeral for my husband? And so I said, no, I'd be honored to, but it'll be kind of abbreviated. Oh, no, we don't want a long funeral, just something short. And so I decided I abbreviated, but I read from the Kisamboge, written by Shantao, the Shukkan Gongyo, the first part of the funeral service that's conducted. And so I actually printed it out and placed it in the coffin with him. And so when they too are 3rd and 4th generation Chinese. So when they went up to the casket, each one of them doing their 3 bows like this, they looked inside. Many of them still read Chinese. And so when I had written on there, this is his Master Shantao's writing. Later, they said, even we know who Shantao is. Thank you for doing this. I said, no, because it's Buddhism. It's this lineage that's passed down that we accept too. So that's why there's this commonality that's there. So the sutras do affect, even still, whether it's kind of subtly, everyday life. I think I'm ending my time here. I could go on for a long time because there's lots of this that we covered when I was helping to translate. But the message of Buddhism, and I will end it with this. I received this and I kept this because this is very important. But Buddhism is a teaching and a practice that focuses on the development of wholesome human behavior. Nirvana, the ultimate goal of Buddhism, is the perfect mental health that a human person can achieve in life. The level of someone's mental health can be measured by observing the compassion and wisdom of that person. Warm-heartedness and equanimity, in other words, caring for everyone without prejudice, are 2 other manifestations of the same personality. Selflessness that opposes the self-centeredness is another indication of good mental health. So with that, the idea of listening, as often is said, 聞こうと思ったら聞こえてくる。ね。If you try to listen to the Dharma, something happens and you begin to not only hear it, you come to realize it. And I think too, even though I wrote it down because this is what Bachan said, and I wanted to say it correctly. When I was young, it's not よく聞きなさい. よく聞いておきなさい. She always says, よう聞きなさい. よう聞いときなさい. How it's different, in English, it's not easy to differentiate. This is one of the things that's lost, or not lost. It's that extra flavor that's in that hogen, that dialect that's there. Yo kito kinsai. I can still hear her say that. When she really wanted me to taicho, taicho. That was her way of, that's how she interpreted it. So, anyway, kyo, arigatou gozaimashita. Naman, 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 naman. Clean this up later.
Thank you very much, SEKIYA Sensei. So we will now sing the gatha Namo Amida Butsu on page 6 in the Blue Service Book. Congregation, please rise.
I left it up here. When life is fair and sunlight gilds the day, when fortune smiles and flowers adorn our way,
Please be seated. Let us recite together the Shinshu Creed found on page 2 in the same book. Followed will be the recitation of the benediction.
The Shinshu Creed. We single-heartedly take refuge upon Tathagata Amitabha for the enlightenment in the life to come, abstaining from all sundry practices and teachings and giving up the trust in our powerless self. We believe that the assurance of our rebirth comes at the very moment we are led to entrust upon the Buddha. We call the name Namo Amida Butsu in happiness and thankfulness for the Buddha's great compassion. We also acknowledge gratefully the benign benevolence of our founder and the succeeding masters who have led us to believe in this profound teaching, and we do now endeavor to follow throughout our lives the way laid down for us. Amida Buddha surrounds all men and all forms of life with infinite life and light. Particularly does the Buddha send forth loving thoughts to those in suffering and sorrow, to all those in doubt and ignorance, to all who are striving to attain truth, and to those whose feet are standing close to the great change men call death. Amida Buddha sends forth oceans of wisdom and compassion. Namo Amida Butsu. 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 Namo Amida Butsu.
We would like to thank you all for attending or watching today's Tsukiji Hongwanji English Dharma service. For those attending here in person, please take time to scan the QR code located near the entrance. For those watching online, please click on the link provided in the description field. We would appreciate if you could fill out the survey provided in the link and give us your feedback or views so that we can improve on the services. The next service will be held on February 24th at 5:30 p.m. in this same room. The guest speaker will be Reverend Naomi Yoshiya, Minister of Zennoji Temple in Hiroshima, and the topic will be the word of Myokonin. We look forward to seeing you again. Let us put our hands together in Gassho. Please feel free to come forward to offer incense. Thank you.